All right, you guys, my journey into the depths of the Sega Genesis Mini continues. I've reviewed it. I've reviewed, at least in micro form, all 42 games that are on there. Gave you my top 10 games that are on the Sega Genesis Mini. We looked at the Sega Genesis Mini Tower. What else did we do? We did a look at little gameplay clips of everything. And I also did the 10 worst games that are on the Sega Genesis Mini. And I'm sure there's a couple other videos that there's a lot to talk about with this machine. But today, I want to talk to you guys about 10 other games that should have been on this console. We should have taken the 10 worst off, and there are 10 games in this list that I would have replaced and put on here instead. I've got a caveat here, okay? I'm not going to concern myself with whatever Sega's lawyers had to do to bring these games to this machine. I don't care about the licensing deals or the music or any of that stuff. They're just good games that were fantastic on the Sega Genesis, and it's just a crying shame that they're not included on this collection. Let's start with number 10, which would be The Adventures of Batman and Robin. Now, this is not the Konami Adventures of Batman and Robin, which is spectacular on the Super Nintendo. Sega did their own Adventures of Batman and Robin, where you can actually play as both Batman and Robin. And it's a shooter. It's a very weird game. It's a run and gun, kind of in the vein of Gunstar Heroes, where you're just throwing out batarangs like they're going out of style, like you'll never run out of them, which always rubbed me the wrong way. And I have to be honest, I've reviewed this game before, and I bought this game for my Sega Genesis back in the day, and I was like, what is happening? This is not Batman and Robin. They're not just running around wasting their batarangs like this. And it's incredibly tough, too, but I always thought it was a little too frenetic and too action-oriented. But in hindsight, and as I've continued to play this game over the years, I recognize the artistry and the brilliance in the design and the incredible art and all of the sort of great mood and sensibility from the animated series that this fantastic game delivers. I don't know what the hell it would take for Sega to work with Warner Brothers and DC to bring this to a collection like the one that we have on the Sega Genesis Mini, but I just think it's a crying shame that it's not here, especially because Sega published this game. Fantastic game. That's why The Adventures of Batman and Robin is number 10. Number 9, I would give it to Mutant League Football. I was thinking about putting Madden in there, but I think that this foray into sort of more inventive, crazy zombie football that EA did back in the 90s, maybe it wasn't the biggest smash success in the world, but I just think it was really fun and goofy, and sports games were a big deal on the Sega Genesis, and I think that putting a sports game on here that's not just a typical version of a sport title, but was kind of super fun and crazy and zany would be a nice direction for these guys to go in. There are lots of other fantastic choices for the Genesis, but I just think that this is a nice one out of left field, no pun intended. And I think it would have been a nice surprise, a nice diversion, and a nice way to kind of tip the hat to the sports genre. I think Mutant League Football should have been on the Sega Genesis Mini. Now, number 8, I'm going to give it to either Desert Strike or Jungle Strike, or a game that was kind of in the same vein, but it was a different style of title, which would be BattleTech. So any one of these sort of isometric combat experiences should have been on here. I think I'd probably lean more in the favor of the Strike games because they made Desert, Jungle, and Urban, and all of them were awesome. You commanded a chopper, and you're blasting at installations, and you're picking up POWs and trying to conserve your ammunition. There was strategy involved with this. You had to kind of navigate the map in some really careful ways. All of that is true as well in BattleTech, where you're commanding this giant mech, and it's incredibly tough, and you're walking through lava, and everybody's out to get you. Super cool design, completely stands the test of time, no matter where you go, whether you get Desert, Jungle, Urban, or BattleTech. All of these games are terrific, so number 8 would be any one of those 4. Number 7 is a little bit of a weird one. It's one, honestly, I've never played, but because of the significance of this title, I think it should be here. Herzog Zwei. I think I'm saying this the right way. It was one of the first real-time strategy games, if not the first real-time strategy game that appeared, especially on the Sega Genesis. It's very rudimentary by modern standards, but the fact that Sega published this and it allowed people to kind of think before they acted, and it had some pretty cool design features that I think were often kind of imitated and borrowed from in later real-time strategy titles, makes this a significant game that should have been on there. I mean, Columns, we could have scrubbed that off. Herzog Zwei, I think, should have been on there. I still don't know if I'm saying the name right, though. Number 6 is Spider-Man Maximum Carnage. Now, if you know me, you know that I love my superhero video games. I could have populated this list with nothing but superhero video games. And there are good Spider-Man games. Sega published an excellent Spider-Man game as well. But there's something about Maximum Carnage. It was very special. It came on a red cartridge. You could play as Spider-Man or Venom. It's a beat 'em up, but it was an inventive one with cool music. The music was better on the Super Nintendo, I know. This is a classic. And even though it's a licensed game, and licensed games got a bad rap, they still do across the video game industry for many, many years, this was one of the better ones. And it's a classic, man. It should have been on this console. Now, in my video for the 10 worst games on the Sega Genesis Mini, I took off Eternal Champions. That was my number 10, which kind of broke my heart because I liked Eternal Champions. But there are better fighting games, and a noticeable absence in the list of titles available for the Sega Genesis Mini is Mortal Kombat. Mortal Kombat 2, I think, should have been on this console. Mortal Kombat 2 was a real refinement on the surprise production that was a part of the first Mortal Kombat title, but it was smoothed out, and it was elegant, and it was easy to play, and it was incredibly bloody. And yes, there would have been problems with the 3-button controller, which is the pack-in controller that you get with the Sega Genesis Mini, but it's such a good game that I think people would have put up with that, and they would have also probably gone right to Amazon and ordered a 6-button controller to be able to play on this machine. Mortal Kombat should have been on there. It would have been great to have Street Fighter and Mortal Kombat sitting on that same machine like that. Number 4, and this is another superhero game, but arguably it's one of the very best video games you can pick up for the Sega Genesis. It's X-Men 2 Clone Wars. You can play as a number of different characters with awesome abilities. You're not penalized for using those abilities. It's still incredibly challenging. The level makeup is incredibly diverse, and the character animations are wonderful and huge sprites on the characters. Lots of great music in this game as well. Lots of great little puzzles to solve. It was such an amazing escape and such a great homage to the X-Men franchise. Lots of great connections to the X-Men comic books. And you can tell it was made by Sega and made with a tremendous amount of reverence and respect for the source material, and it absolutely deserves to be on here. And honestly, it speaks to the value of the best licensed stuff that's out there. You know, like these stakeholders in the video game space need to recognize that when they create something as important and seminal as X-Men 2 is, that there's a way to preserve it for future generations so that they can appreciate it. And it's a crying shame that X-Men 2 is not on the Sega Genesis Mini. And again, you can kind of say that about number 3, which is NHL 94, or if you choose 93. One of the NHL games should have been on the Genesis Mini. Arguably, hockey on Genesis was something that I think really kick-started sports gaming in North America. At least it did in the friends and family that I was dealing with and talking with when the Genesis came out. I lived with a whole bunch of people. We were all roommates inside of a house. There was like 7 of us or 8 of us. And we all played this game together, and those are some of my most enjoyable memories of playing video games ever. And it was this game, playing NHL, and just loving the freedom and the speed and the big hits and the fights that you would get into and the one-timers and just the accessibility, but the out-of-control zaniness of this sport, it makes it a perfect choice for the video game format. And with the 16-bit horsepower that the Genesis provided back then, it was like this perfect storm where you could have speed and great controls and fantastic animations and cool arena music. It was so enjoyable, and it's a crying shame that NHL isn't honored on the Sega Genesis Mini, and NHL 94 or 93 should have been in this collection. Now, number 2 is Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles: The Hyperstone Heist, which is the Genesis answer to Turtles in Time, which is also, I mean, these are fantastic games, and yes, they're licensed, and yes, they're based on cartoon and comic book characters, but that doesn't detract from the great gameplay. The Hyperstone Heist is a fantastic brawler with terrific animation and lots of moments that are going to make you smile and laugh, and you're battling all kinds of crazy bad guys across fantastically designed levels. This is a wonderful piece of software, and it breaks my heart to see these licensed titles kind of get lost in time, you know? Like, we should find a way to preserve fantastic games like this. And I would say the exact same thing about Disney's Aladdin, which is #1 on my list. This is made by a lot of the same team that went on to make Earthworm Jim. They were all working at Virgin, and they worked on animation technology that blew everybody away across the video game business back then. The good news is that Disney's Aladdin is being re-released, the Sega Genesis version, so you can get it in a collection from Disney very soon, which is great. And full disclosure, we worked on the behind the scenes on that, so we have become very intimate with the game and its relevance to the 16-bit era. What a crying shame that it's not included on this collection. And there are lots of other licensed games and lots of other fantastic titles out there that are worthy, but there's something very special about Disney's Aladdin, maybe because Aladdin is back in the news in such a big way with the success of the live-action movie, but this was a great way to celebrate an incredible animated feature done actually with a lot of the Disney animation team who were lending their craft to game developers for the first time. And so this beautiful hand-drawn moments just come to life and you're able to play them, and there's so much personality and such great music from our buddy Tommy Tellerico. It was just a great, fun experience, and you felt like there was a lot of variety in the mission structure, and when you completed the levels and completed the game, you felt like a champion. So yes, it's a big shame that Aladdin isn't on the Sega Genesis Mini. Now, those are the 10 that I would have chosen, and I could have probably spent another couple of weeks, months, years going over every single title that could have potentially been on here. This list might change down the road, actually, and there will probably be future collections of Genesis games, and we will probably have lots of opinions about what is and isn't included, but this is my list of 10 that I think should have been included as I'm ruminating and thinking about all of these different titles and experiencing these 16-bit Genesis games again. Now, here's what I want you to do. Take a few minutes and educate me on what you think should have been included on the Sega Genesis Mini. List out 10 games that Sega overlooked that you think should have been on the Sega Genesis Mini. I definitely want to read those, and I'll talk about them on a future episode of EP Live.